Good afternoon. We've got a nice little crowd over here, but I'm told the camera's over here, so I'm going to be a little schizophrenic this afternoon. This session is Must Every C-Suite Leader Now Think Like a CISO? Really, really important discussion. I was looking at some analysis just in preparation for this, and McKinsey surveyed its CEOs this year and discovered that over the past decade, the expectations that we have for what issues those CEOs will cover have doubled. Geopolitics is key, that's my bread and butter, legal, but also cybersecurity. And that leads us to, should every C-suite leader be a CISO? Cyber risk has moved from the server room to the boardroom. It's now a strategic issue as well as a technical one. The financial exposure is significant. Global losses are expected to reach 10.5 trillion US dollars this year. And again, I did a little research. That's equivalent to the GDPs of Japan, Germany, and India added together. That's an extraordinary number. Every executive, not just the CISO, now shapes the organization's cyber resilience. In fact, every employee does. The question is no longer what is our cybersecurity plan, but how does our business model perform under persistent digital attack? With that, I have 4 speakers I would like to introduce who can talk us through this question. The first is Yasser Al-Swalim, apologies if I'm not getting your name right, who's the CEO of Sirar by STC. Hi, Yasser, thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Alain Gavin, Managing Partner and CIO of Psan Partners, and the partner at Carista. Philippe Carrière, SEVP Strategy, Research and Technology at Thales, and Amaya Talwalkar, founder and CEO of Sequence Security. Thanks so much for joining. Please take a seat. Oh, take a seat. Yasser, if I might, I'd like to start with you. Sirar has positioned itself as a regional leader in cybersecurity services. What are you seeing in the biggest shift in the way that boards and the way that CEOs across the GCC approach cyber risk today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I just need to give some context about my experience. I used to sit in the CISO seat for almost 10 years. Then I'm right now sitting on the other side of the table as a board member and as a CEO as well. So what I'm witnessing basically is we're speaking different languages. We don't understand each other. And I'm not sure whether the CISO is expected to understand the board language or the other way around. I think in today's economies, there has to be a common ground. The cyber risk isn't a technology risk anymore. It became a business risk. It became something that may impact the reputation of the company. It became something that could be translated in a valuation risk that may impact even the valuation of the company. And to give an example of that, if we saw the ticket that was executed by Verizon when they acquired Yahoo, I mean, the ticket size was impacted due to the incidents that Yahoo faced, a couple of times. So the valuation of Yahoo was decreased due to the cyber factor. It's a reputation, it's a brand. So when we say cyber risk, it's all of the above. It's a brand, it's a business sustainability, it's a valuation risk, it's a business continuity, it's an ESG, especially nowadays when we talk about ESG. The challenge, I believe, is that there is no middle ground between the technology people and the CEO and the board members and their committees as well. So some organizations, they talked about the compliance posture. And this is a message for the board members. They need to know and they need to learn how to ask the right question. I remember when I stand in front of my CEO and the board members, the fundamental question that they usually ask, are we secured? and I don't think this is the right question to ask. There has to be some sort of matrices, a matrix to be able to measure how effective is the cybersecurity. So in a nutshell, I think having a common ground, whether in a form of matrices, common language, and this common language could evolve from compliance as a basic, especially those organizations who are heavily regulated, like the BSFI, then moving to building some sort of capability, efficiency, maturity. Then those mature organizations nowadays, they became talking about business resiliency. Are we resilient or not? Yeah.
So we'll come back to the question, I hope, over the course of the conversation, which is how do we train our C-suite to ask the right questions, right? How do we help them develop the right language? But before we go there, Alain, I wanted to come to you. In an exchange we had prior to this, you spoke about two types of cyber attack, the financial and the strategic. One of the challenges that we face in this space is, of course, the infrastructure is not always, or the regulatory environment is government-led, but the actors are private sector. So can you say a word about, maybe drilling in a little bit into the strategic, because we've covered a little bit of the financial. Where does the responsibility lie between the state and the corporate in terms of protecting digital assets, and how is the nature of the threat changing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the nature of the threat has changed, especially since the Ukraine war. It has become, and even you could say when Russia took over Crimea. And so there's been a lot of activity in the area of trying to destabilize sovereign nations, especially across Europe. I'm not sure whether it's also here in the region, but definitely across Europe, where elections have been tampered through social media and other activities. You've had disinformation and cognitive warfare happening, and you've had also critical infrastructure being attacked. Water was one in the UK that they got close to infiltrating with poison. And then you have, right at the bottom of that, the economic actors, companies, but who have an impact on security and helping secure defense assets and others. So you have that mix of different elements that are being attacked. And this is what we call a grey war, which is not obvious. You don't know who's doing it, or whoever's wanted to do it is not very clear about it. And so I mean, what we do in our fund is we invest into those types of companies along with space and security assets. But the aspect that I found, coming back to your question about how government and companies work together, I was at a Space Isaac, which is where basically wargaming happens in between industry on one side and government on the other side, and they try to simulate an attack on some critical infrastructure. In this case, it was energy. What happens? It was clear it's a cyber attack on the critical energy. It's cutting off energy. So basically, the nation as a whole is getting attacked from energy perspective. And then how do you counteract that? And the thing that we saw was that industry and companies are at a nascent level of how to address those as a form, yeah.
And just very quickly, where have you seen a successful interaction between the government and the corporate sector? Have you seen a successful interaction? Because you talked about language and translation, but this is another area of translation that needs to take place.
Yeah, so there is a Cybersecurity Center, which is part of GCHQ in the UK, which is a very secretive organization, which, for example, from M&S, when M&S got attacked, they called them and they were the first port of call. So that's how government and industry work in that way. And that attack cost 300 million pounds. And then recently with JLR, you had another 1.3 billion in cost to the company. And again, the cybersecurity center was active from the get-go, and they try to interact, but they can't prevent human failure.
Yeah, and I remember I was in the US government post 9/11, and one of the real challenges we had is the infrastructure is private sector,
Yes.
but it's the government who's got overall responsibility, and so that translation is also really important. Philippe, you're with Thales, which of course, massive French defense security company, plus, plus, plus. Talk to us a little bit about the nexus of defense technology and critical infrastructure, you know, and how has your definition of cyber resilience evolved with the new technologies, with the arrival of AI, which I believe you're also involved in,
Absolutely.
you know, supply chains attacks that we're seeing. So talk to us a little bit about that space, if you would.
Yeah, and absolutely. And maybe you may all wonder why a large aerospace and defense company happened to create a cyber business. And this is exactly through the reasoning that you mentioned, which is 10 years ago, we really thought that cyber would become the next theater of conflictuality. And it has become in a certain way. So throughout those 10 years, what we did was to somehow build a cyber business, which is now at scale. It's a 4 billion euro revenue business, somehow with the aim of protecting ourselves, but more importantly, protecting the verticals and the customers we have in aerospace and defense, which are some of the most demanding customers. But in order to do so, we need to be state-of-the-art, so we need to be a cyber company. So this was the reasoning. And in fact, what we did as well was to try to identify what is the next level, or what would be the most valuable things. And we came through two somehow essential, let's say, things. One is everything around the world with the rise of cloud, but also of artificial intelligence. All this is linked to data. So in order to protect yourself, protect data, but also protect people accessing data, which is identity. So put identities and data at the center of your protection. And then there is a second element, which is linked to the resilience, is in cyber, zero risk does not exist. So therefore, you should be prepared for zero surprise. And therefore, you need to be considered that you will be attacked, that attackers will find a way inside your systems, and therefore, this is where comes the resilience, which is to be prepared, to really train yourself of reacting fast, having your systems always up to date, having a detect and response 24 hours and 7 days a week, and all this linking to exactly what you mentioned, which is that at the end, a cyber attack is money, it is influence, it is your reputation, so minimizing the impact is absolutely at the core of what you need to do.
So again, I would love to come back to you as how do you protect internally, and what's the kind of conversation that you have at the C-suite, at the board level, to be able to do that so that you're asking the right questions. But before we do that, Amaya, I want to come to you, if I may. Tell us a little bit about what your company does, and how you think about the integration of information in useful ways, protecting that information, and how you see the threats changing from your perspective.
Yeah, so at Sequence, we're in the business of protecting your AI applications and APIs. So that's what we do. We help many Fortune 500, Global 2000 companies, including some in the kingdom, doing that. In terms of how things have evolved, I can sort of take the theme that is sort of going across, is unfortunately, as an industry, we have a tendency that innovation outpaces security. And that has happened again in the AI space. So what we are seeing almost every month, if you trace back last 5-6 months, every month there is a new AI-related breach that is happening and that is made public. And I think it's only going to increase and escalate going forward. And I agree with Philippe, and the point is about you need to secure your data, right? Ultimately, AI and agents and LLMs, they're all tools that you're using. Ultimately, the bad actors are behind your data. That's your value. that's the value that you've created as a company, as an enterprise, or as a government. And I can give very quickly a couple of examples where the innovation has outpaced, defense or cyber defense. We're all familiar. We, go to different websites and we get presented with these captchas. Click on the bridges and fire hoses and bicycles. That is a challenge that a user is faced to prove that a user is a human being and not some kind of a bot or some automation. Now, what has happened with the advancements of AI is the AI-assisted bots are able to click those things faster and more accurately and getting through that challenge, whereas the human beings are the ones who are getting stuck, right? And so more and more of these techniques are impacting real users, whereas the AI advancements have helped the bad actors more. And another example I can give is a very large Fortune 50 company where AI adoption they're by far ahead of any of our customers that we talk to. They started going down the path of AI adoption only to realize that AI has sucked in documents that it should never have access to. And so then they had to pause their AI deployments and AI initiatives to make sure they deploy AI with all the safety guardrails and visibility in mind. And that's a board level conversation. Coming back to our theme, this is a board level conversation that not just the CISO, but also the CEO and the CIO is having, and reporting to the board what they are doing to safely enable AI across the company.
So let me pose a question to all of you, and let's just take a moment to understand the threat, right? And you've given various examples of the threat you're seeing, but I want you to look forward for a moment and say, given where you see the technology going, whether it's AI, Gen AI, agentic AI, quantum, you name it, what do you see as the threats, the key threats that any organization, any company needs to be planning for now, with the assumption that the offense is always ahead of the defense, right? What is it that the defense needs to be doing now in order to manage that? So what's the threat and what is it that we can do about it? And then I would love to come back to this question of, and how do we educate our leaders to be able to have those conversations, to be able to make those decisions. I do want to say we've got a small enough group here today that I would like to take questions from the floor if you have questions. So I'm then going to come to you all if you want to raise questions as well. But who wants to take what is the threat?
I can, go ahead, finish it.
I can start.
One of you can start with what's the threat, and the other one can
Okay,
pick up,
so I'll start with
what do
the
we do
threat.
about it? Go ahead.
I think to make it in one sentence and very simple, the threat is a world where you don't know anymore who and what you can trust.
Yeah.
Okay, so it comes down to trust, or lack thereof.
Or lack of
Yeah,
trust.
well, to second him, I think the real challenge isn't with the things that we know, is with the things that we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The threat is very industry or entity specific, in my opinion. But how to address the threat is, I like, Yasir, your answer earlier, which is most mature organizations have a model where they list down the threats, the probability of that threat actually happening, and then some compensating controls to mitigate that thing. And they report it to the board level almost on a quarterly basis that these are my compensating controls, and this is therefore the residual risk that we are taking. Because it's all about investments, right? So it's the probability of the risk getting realized versus how much investments are you ready to make to sort of counter that. That's the board level conversation on how you address the threat.
But it's a bit more complicated at government level, because what you see at government level is that you have governments still seeing cyber as a comms issue rather than seeing it as a cyber attack issue, a real threat to their security. And this is the startups we invest in. They when they're talking to the government, they think, oh yeah, that's a PR department. That's not us. Yeah.
And when you say PR, what you're essentially saying is the government says it isn't actually a threat, it's just our inability to communicate
Precisely, and that's completely wrong. They've got it completely wrong, and that was pre-Crimea. But since Crimea, that's all changed because there are a lot of threats that we never hear about. We just see the effects of them. For example, in the Romanian election, all that was all about 80,000 bots pounding the social media.
Yeah.
They all came from Russia, and they were all pounding it hard. And that's how the election all of a sudden became favorable for one person. And that's the power of social media. So data is one issue, but the other issue is about influencing minds in various regions. And this is, I think, the harder one to grasp.
Okay, so what do we do about, so we've got a trust problem, we've got an education problem, we've got a reputational communications problem, we've got a data problem. So what do we do about those things?
I mean, there has to be a plan. The challenge, I believe, even at the management and the CEO and the management level is they are treating it as a still technology with a program. You never hear about security or cyber risk treatment strategy. The word strategy isn't there at the management level. And simply because it doesn't come as a mandate from the board, because the board is lacking the knowledge to demand the right, I would say, question, or the demand to write the right requirements among the management. So once they have a strategy, so like what my colleagues mentioned, if we know that there is uncertain things around quantum computing, AI, Gen AI, data poisoning, disinformation, misinformation, so the question that should be asked, what is our strategy to because this has to do even with our data. Nowadays, we became a small world. The data is traveling beyond the boundaries of our organization. So the point is there has to be a strategy, and this strategy has to be aligned with the local regulator, has to be aligned with the business, and so on and so forth.
So I'm hearing you essentially say use the same management techniques, whether it's a matrix, audit system or strategy. I want to go to a quick question because I want to pick up something that Alain, you said, and we were starting to talk about government versus corporate and responsibility, and there's a poll. So if people have your telephones, I think we can get up on the screen a poll, maybe? Yes, it's coming. Can you, there you go. Can you, if you've got your phones handy, oh. The question is something along the lines of, if it comes, oh, here we go. I'm not going to try and paraphrase it. Here we go. Do you trust your government leaders to navigate the changes? So just trying to get a little bit into this. I mean, I wish we had a second question, which is, do you trust your corporate leaders? Maybe we'll do that by hands. People voting, hopefully. One of the things that this reminds me of is there's a progression of learning. Maybe this is a good way to get into the how do we train people. There's a progression of learning from, what is it? Something like unknown incompetence to known incompetence to known competence to unknown competence, if you can kind of follow that. And it seems like, based on what you say, we're getting into the known incompetence, with occasional moments in the known competence, but we're not in the unknown competence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it depends on the sector again. The AI is very, very new, so we are at the beginning phase, which is everything is unknown at this point, right? Whereas some of the more mature technologies are in the sort of the later things that you mentioned, which is known incompetence.
It kind of reminds me, I always hesitate to quote Don Rumsfeld, but is the unknown unknowns, right? US Secretary of Defense, unknown unknowns.
and keep in mind, there is no certainty. There might be one at a certain moment, but somehow, like in defense, attackers and somehow ability to defend is evolving at the same time. So you go from the unknown to the known to the unknown, and as long as new technologies are coming, new attackers, new attacks, new failures, and whatsoever. So it is not something where you can claim victory. This is something on which you need to have a constant security posture, and you need to evolve it over time.
So the obvious question is, why are our C-suite not getting it? I mean, yes, they don't know the language. Here we go. Do we trust our government leaders? 64% say yes. Interesting. Not what I would have imagined. I wish we had as I say, I wish we had, do we trust our corporate leaders? I want to come back to this question of, okay, so why is it that corporate leaders struggle so much? But I do actually want to go out to the room. Questions from the room. Yes, this gentleman.
My question would be about...
There's a mic coming. Can you just say one word who you are?
Yes, Fahad Al-Bdah, co-founder of Ijari. My question would be about execution. What do you think is the ideal way to put a framework for the C-suite to start thinking like CISOs? Would it be to implement tools like Yasser mentioned, bring on someone that has enough experience to put this framework in place? How do I kick this off, basically?
Great question. I'm going to take another question. I'm going to take two from the floor if there's a second one. Otherwise, I'll come back to... No. Okay, who wants to take that?
Well, the first I would address is, first you need to address your threat levels and what sort of threats you can be exposed to, and because of your industry or if you're in government, what sort of threat levels are you exposed to? And then from there, then I would develop what Yasser was talking about, a strategic plan about how you then counter those. And then from that plan, then execution. And I think that people miss out the first evaluation of what they could expect, or what could be the worst case scenario, and then the plan, and then the execution.
So back to basics, essentially, back to business basics. Go ahead.
That's my point. Fix the basics, start with the basics. If your company is regulated, then ticking the compliance box might give you a false assurance that you are secure, but compliance doesn't equal to security. It's just a regulatory requirement. But fix the basics. I mean, there are lots of international standards like SANS Top 20, the Top 20 controls that every organization globally, irrespective to their industry, have to implement. And there are, we could talk for hours about this, but fix the basics.
Yeah, there are many frameworks like NIST and others that you mentioned, Yasser. It's all about what works for you, what are your real risks, what value you have in your enterprise, what are the risks of that value being targeted by bad actors, and what are the different ways in that can be compromised, what are the probabilities of each of these different paths, and then how are you doing a compensating control for each one of these things, leaving with you some residual risk that you need to expose to the board.
So the comforting part of this story is we know how to do this, right? And business leaders know how to do this, that there is a methodology that we can use. But I want to kind of close going back to where we started, which is this idea of translation. We're not actually asking the right questions in the C-suite, right? If each of you had the ability to snap your fingers and insist that your C-suite did one thing, one piece of training, one set of scenario exercises, what would be the one thing you'd do? Picking up this gentleman's question, what is the one thing that you would insist that your boards, your C-suite do that would be the most meaningful step on the journey to having everybody think like a CISO?
Well, I think the first one you would do is train your staff, because that is the weakest link in your organization, is the staff. A lot of the recent cyber attacks were because somebody tricked the person in the company to thinking that they were giving the data to their IT department, and in fact it was an external. If you need to understand, and they're good at their job. That's how they get in, right? Because that's their their method. So you need to train your staff to be very, very aware of the methods and techniques that are being used to counter the weakest link.
So it's more staff training, kind of more along the phishing, et cetera, et cetera.
And
What else?
If I may phrase it this way, follow the money. Where is your money? What are your mission critical systems that brings you money? Make sure those crown jewel are well secured. Then the rest will follow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Focus on the
Crown jewel.
crown jewels.
And exercise, train, do rehearsals,
Yeah.
and quantify the amount of time or money that you are ready to lose.
Right.
So both matrix, do the FRAC auditing matrix, but also scenarios, actually play this one out.
So cybersecurity is a team sport. So I find many situations where CISOs or security leaders are considered sort of blockers of business enablement. And I think we need to fundamentally shift that mindset that they're actually enablers of business. They actually, to Yasir's point earlier, they are also looking at valuation of the company based on their cyber resilience and things like that. So I think at the senior level, at the leadership level, or the C-suite level, you need to participate as a team versus CISO being the only responsible person for security.
Yes, it's not an ISIT problem.
So I will add to that as somebody who used to be responsible for compliance for a large energy company.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. But that means people like myself need to learn to speak a different language, back to
Of
your
course.
point, right?
Yes,
Because if
absolutely.
all I'm doing is blocking initiatives, blocking investments, blocking M&A, I'm never going to be part of the team.
Absolutely,
Right?
absolutely.
So
But that has to be in the DNA of the C-suite, that this is not a blocker, this is an enablement or a safe enablement.
So as we close, what I can suggest to everybody in the room who runs a company or sits on the C-suite of a company, come and talk to one of these gentlemen because they will help you implement what needs to be done next. Because what we did discuss, and I think is, I suspect there isn't a person in the room who disagrees with the statement that the threat is only growing. We didn't get to the government, private sector nexus, but maybe next time. Will you all join me in thanking our panel, and thank you all very much for joining us.